Hey, 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 world. It's been a while. How's it going? It's Wednesday. It's time for another Mattriarchy. I am your host, Matt Reese. I am joined today by not Matt, Marmaduke fan, and not Matt, Twitless.
Hey.
We were supposed to have Matt Crotts on, but I guess he's too good for us with his big Kyrie money now. I don't know. So I don't know. Wires crossed. Maybe he thinks it's next week. That'll be funny.
It's hurricane season. He's got a lot to dodge.
Well, that's true. That's true. He could be getting blown away by a hurricane, and then I'm the insensitive ass. So who knows what'll happen from here. So how are you guys doing?
That Crotts is Florida, man. I'm all right today.
I'm doing pretty good. I've been gone for 2 months off of this platform. Can you guys believe that?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I did a video to say I was live streaming on my other channel last week, but that was it.
I mean, I guess the weird thing about me is I schedule videos in advance. So sometimes I do go dark for a couple months, but then the videos keep creeping out. So I don't know. Like no one ever really knows when I'm online or not.
Well, that's all part of the Marmaduke Mysterium, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's your own little mystery box of things. And
yeah, you never know if it's going to be like one of my weird avant-garde postmodern experiments from art school, or is it going to be a Let's Play? Is it going to be a girly shoujo romance mango review? Everybody come on over. I promise you will not know what's happening next.
Well, and I gotta love the some of the weird art school stuff is really good, and some of it is wow.
Okay, so I guess we need. I need details.
You guys did like a 2-person play that you had there.
Yeah.
And my goodness, that was hilarious. I absolutely I was splitting my sides at that one. And
Josh and Josh, yeah.
Yeah, Josh and Josh.
That was before I lost the name Josh at the Josh fight.
Oh, yes, that's right. It was years before you lost the name Josh. You thought you were secure in your Joshness.
Are you just joshing us?
Wow.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah.
That's bad. Are you even authorized to tell that level of joke? Have you reproduced and have the gravitas to really pull that off?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, do I have my joke license?
Jeepers. Okay. Anyhow, so today we have come, and I love this. Dave Ashanovich, if I'm saying it right, says schedule videos so far in the future, you're sure to be dead.
Yeah, but they only let you schedule three years in advance. I found out.
Wow.
That used to be different. I think they used to let you schedule them like whenever you wanted to, and they changed it.
Which probably means there are some weirdly scheduled videos from people who were grandfathered in. I would hope.
Yeah. Someday that's it's gonna happen. Oh, hey, 10-cent Story says his favorite are the Sonic meme videos.
Yeah.
Which memes? Are we talking about the old school YouTube poop Robotnik memes?
I do some of those. I'm not as good at it as like the real legit YouTube poopers, but I've done like I've done a supercut series with Robotnik for YouTube poopers to make it easier for them to get Robotnik clips. And then when I made that, I made little mini jokes and I assembled those together into, I guess it would be like my first official old school Robotnik YouTube poop. And then I've done some other, I don't know, it's like observational humor. I love YouTube poop, so I could talk about this all day. But a lot of it is about
YouTube poop's great.
Right. A lot of it's observational humor and trying to identify things that are funny in the old cartoon, and then maybe like remix them or rework them to make them funny again today. And then one of the strange things is that some of them have become so popular, I can no longer watch that old cartoon without hearing the, like the I Teach Vader Robotnik music videos or all of the references.
I Teach Vader's great. Yeah, he's new too, because like a lot of them are like the Chairman Boogie Boo. They're like 10 years old.
I feel like I Teach Vader. He's gone. If you go back into like his oldest videos, he was back in I think he goes back about 10 years. I mean, he wasn't popular 10 years ago. He got popular recently, right? So it makes him feel like old and new at the same time.
I miss the chairman.
I would like to point out that one of the weird things about YouTube as a whole is the cyclical nature of stuff. Like stuff that like was a thing for like, you know, a month or two, like in 2008, can all of a sudden just reappear and be something.
Yeah. I don't think that the YouTube poop heyday was like 2008, 2009. I don't think it's much different than like this, what we call Zoomer humor now.
Not in style.
Just
it's mostly in the
pure randomness.
Yeah, the style is the same. It's just that because of over time, the randomness of the current day shifts. So when you watch some of the older stuff, like the memes of that day are somewhat dated. If you watch like a really old YouTube poop, the style of it is pretty much exactly the same as what you would get today. It's just the jokes and references are different.
And making it's almost like an editing challenge, right? So I'd almost encourage people, like if you want to get into editing, making a YouTube poop is a great way of trying it, because you're trying to create something purely using editing techniques. And to tie this back to fine arts, I think that the postmodern artists of the video art movement were precursors of this, because they were doing stuff like what the YouTubers were doing in the 70s. So like they would take, you know, footage of Wonder Woman and they just play it backwards and forwards, right? It was just clear like, oh, let's just do something weird with this pre-existing video footage and see if we can remix it or make something weird out of it, right? So I always loved that angle on it too, that the fine arts, you know, nerdy, you know, intellectual world foreshadowed the sort of trashy, you know, everyman's democratic YouTube world.
Well, and here's the question, and this is something that I don't think this is necessarily today's question, but something for future that I will have to have you on to talk about this. The difference, like that dividing line between high art and low art, right? Between fine arts and folk arts, and is it real and does it matter? And I think I have a lot of thoughts about that I'd like to talk over with somebody of similar mind on that. But
I almost feel like the postmodern intellectual movement has in a way kind of like poisoned art discourse to the point where I don't know how to have art discourse with anyone, because it's either someone coming from, I would say like they just don't care about and that's an admirable position. Like if you just say, I don't care about the postmodern movement whatsoever, then that means that we can just like ignore that stuff and talk about like the art world before that revolution. If you're talking to someone who's been influenced by that movement, then it's sort of like it upsets all the categories, right? Because they deconstruct everything, right? I kind of have like this weird minority position where I dislike a lot of postmodern art because I dislike the worldview of it, but I actually respect it because they are genuinely making art that is consistent with a postmodern worldview. So I can't fault them for being inconsistent with their worldview. And I also think that maybe there's an argument you can make that you can learn from the techniques and the ideas of it, even if you hate the worldview of it. I guess like the closest thing would be like admiring an enemy or saying that guy is a great general, even if he's fighting for the wrong side. I think maybe one of the things that the postmodern art movement was really good at was breaking all the rules, and in breaking all the rules that kind of made for I don't know, like flexibility or an ability to make anything. So I don't know. So because even as you bring up like the high art, low art distinction, we almost like you almost can't have that discussion whatsoever in a postmodern context, because they knocked it over. They said, we're going to make the low art and we're going to bring the comic books into the museum and declare it to be high art. We're going to declare ideas to be art. And once you get that point, it's like, well, there's no difference anymore, right?
Well, I mean, and the thing is with some of that stuff, right? And some of that stuff, it actually ends up being the form of something without the power of it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that's one thing, like growing up the post pop art era and having like, comic panels being used, young romance being used as a production piece. That was something, but it also missed what was really going on with graphic storytelling.
Yeah.
And it was a way that it actually, in a lot of ways, I think set back the consideration of narrative storytelling as an art form,
right?
At least in America, because it was like, oh, we're poking fun at this, so obviously there's no sincerity to it.
And
in the same way that, like, you know, like Batman stories got serious, telling serious detective stories, you know, in the 70s, but nobody paid attention to it until Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got 12 years of serious, hardcore detective stories that are being done. Roy Lichtenstein. Thank you.
Yep. That Roy Lichtenstein's a great example of like the intellectual class being out of step with everybody else, because, you know, everybody else is just, oh yeah, we like comic books, hooray. And for Roy Lichtenstein, that is a intellectual joke where at the same time he is taking a low art and bringing it into the high art context of the museum. He's sort of simultaneously making fun of the comic book art form, but he's also making fun of the sort of elite intellectuals who like high art, right? Like he's sort of like honk. It's like a clown nose thing where for serious artists, well, comic books are a low art that has no place in a museum. Roy Lichtenstein, you know, he honks the clown nose of the art museum by bringing a comic book into it. Hey, well, Matt Reese, being a good husband, that's totally cool.
Yeah,
go for it.
I dig on that, like, seriously.
Please tell. I was so curious to hear Matt C's thoughts on composition styles in Gene Luen Yang comics. So I'll do my best to be nerdy about that, but you're going to have to tweet about it sometime.
Well, here's the question. We're on this discussion about high art, low art. It's already 7:30. Should we postpone today's topic and keep talking about art theory?
Yeah, and then bring in Matt C for
Gene Luen Yang
another time. All right.
Great. I have so much to contribute to this from my position as an English major.
Nice.
Well, here's the thing though, like I'm a human service worker, but I mean I'm also, you know, a writer. So I don't my perspective of art, there's a break between the conceptualization of it and the philosophy behind it. And also when you're looking at you know, from a functional perspective. And I think that's like one of the problems with a lot of postmodern thinking is that it's all theory, no practice. And that's part of when I look at the high art, low art kind of thing, the fine arts versus folk arts aspect of it. Oh, so Matt's just dumping it all into the chat. There you go. But I think that one of the things you have is that you have.
I just read Boxers and Saints, by the way, so I'm actually I did my homework.
Well, and here's the other thing: as I was sending everybody links out, I'm like, Twitless is coming. I don't have anything to show pictures on the screen of all this stuff. He's going to be really irritated.
Yeah. Give me.
Yeah, but
whatever we're talking about, I can look up.
Yeah. Boxers and Saints is just great. Yeah,
I think that's his best work. Yeah, I've read Boxers and Saints. I've read American Born Chinese. I've read Superman Smashes the Klan. I didn't get a chance to read that other one you recommended to us.
Yeah, and the ones I read were Boxers and Saints, American Born Chinese, and the Shadow Hero, which is great.
So I might be in the minority. I had some mixed feelings about Boxers and Saints.
Okay.
This might be something, I don't know if this is a conversation we want to have now or wait till we have it with Matt. I don't know, but it was interesting because I do like Yang.
Well, so we got to decide. So are we good? So let's decide together. Should we
wait? Right on stream.
I don't know. Like what you guys should know.
Decided before your very eyes.
Well, here's the thing is, you got to roll with the punches. You got to figure out where the fire is at. Yeah. And I really feel like Matt should be here in voice for this topic. I really think.
I was really looking forward to hearing Matt C, because he brings like I don't know. Matt C is one of these creators who brings a different perspective, which I like. Because you can always sort of predict the standard perspective. So it's always nice to get someone who's maybe like a little bit, even if he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, or that's like a rather weirdly specific. Like okay, I'm gonna roast Matt C since he's not here. Just get Matt C talking about the big two, and he'll just go on a roll. I don't like how the big two make everybody think it's all about superhero comics, right? So like even when he gets on a roll, I like having that kind of additional perspective mixed into the soup.
Okay, so it's agreed. We'll look at maybe I have an opening last week in I think right now the last week in August. But we'll talk about that. We'll figure out the date. We'll go from there. So back to the fine arts, low arts thing.
All right.
Okay. So I think like when you look at this like at a pre-modern perspective, the difference between fine art and low art was access and skill level, right? Yeah. But even then, if you look at like literarily, like Shakespeare, there really wasn't a difference because
right. He's appealing to the masses, yeah.
And he was appealing to the highbrow. So the idea is that art is actually it's dealing with these big issues about what a society is and what nature is and what man is and all these big brain ideas, but it was also bringing and elevating the low audience to that level. So it was written in a way that, like, if you didn't get all of the themes, you'd still enjoy the premise that was going on, but you could elevate to that level of understanding more of those themes. And the same thing with visual arts in the Renaissance, right? They were being commissioned by the hoity-toity. Matt just appears in the green room. They were written to appeal to the hoity-toity.
Did someone say hoity-toity?
I did. I did. And
sorry,
and we sucked him in.
I got like 10 minutes.
Yeah. And they were written to pave the way. I mean, they were paid by the highbrow, but they were still being put in churches. They're still being put in public centers, and they're still there for the common man to appreciate that art in a lot of ways. And because they were a lot of, especially in Europe, a lot of that was religious stuff. It was governmental stuff. So it was there to be consumed by that. So the high art, low art divide seems to me to be largely an artificial one that was just based upon who got to get paid after we moved past the era of patronage and into the idea of more journeymen and as society grew and that kind of
stuff. So how would you fit like something like Impressionism into that framework? Right, where the Impressionists were popular, but they were essentially frowned upon by the, I guess maybe like the more rigorous academics of their time. It would be much more about creating a polished form of art, and their loose painting style is sort of a rejection of that whole philosophy of painting.
Right. Well, I think it depends on the individual Impressionists, right? So if you look at like Monet's stuff. Monet had like all of the chops to be like a neoclassicist, but his entire desire was to play with colors and to play with light and to see these different things and give them the way that those specific elements would impact you in those environs, right? So you can actually do with just a camera recreate a lot of the same, well, not a digital camera with all the megapixels anymore, but you go back to your old 16 millimeter cameras, right? Or 32 millimeters. You could actually recreate a lot of those shots on film because light would play that way. And I think there's something to be said for that. That's a different experience. And then if you, so I think that depends on your exact impressionist. Some of them were trying to thumb their nose, but some of them were trying to look at a physical property and relate that together. So,
but they were doing it through the La Académie, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Not through. They weren't selling their stuff on the street corner.
Well, exactly. Like the Salon de Refuse. Like we're the rejects from the Academy show. But the Salon de Refuse artists are the ones we learn about in art history because their painting styles became, I guess, maybe like the groundwork for like new and dangerous styles, right? So I think that the Impressionists are definitely when we start getting, they're minor exceptions. Like the Mannerists in the Renaissance were sort of like the edgy, punk rock teens of the Renaissance era. But I think at least when you get to Impressionism, that's when the course of painting starts moving towards the experimental and away from the refined. And then I would say like from that point on, it's just like a continual like new experimenters rise up and they defeat the old experimenters. So the Cubists.
I think we definitely saw a cycle in that, but I think even with that, we're looking at what's the motivation behind some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So in Impressionism, there's still a love of light, right? That's undergirding.
Well, I mean, even if you look at like the Expressionists, like specifically Van Gogh, right? Van Gogh was painting the potato eaters because he thought that everybody deserved something.
Yeah,
you remember what I'm saying? So like even that was about finding that and he was a disturbed man, but he had a love for normal people.
Yeah.
And he passionately and desperately wanted to express love to normal people. And so he painted everyone, and he painted them in a way that drew the eye in. And even though it's not necessarily it gave the feeling for a thing and the idea of a time and place and space rather than the image of the thing itself.
Where would you put the romantic painters? Because they were kind of rejecting highbrow. They left the city to go to the countryside and paint the poor and paint like anti-civilization kind of art,
Right. But
they were doing it in the academy.
You mean put them into like the context of like how would they fit into high art and low art distinctions?
Yeah, because they're still academy art, but they are they're romanticizing, the less civilization the better,
All right.
They're looking for the noble savage, they're looking for the ruins of civilization amongst
Wordsworth. Yeah,
nature.
Wordsworth, when he wrote lyrical ballads, was definitely it was for the common man.
Right. Well,
and Twitless, like I think a lot of this painting discussion actually directly parallels like poetry and English literature.
Right.
Right.
There's some overlap. It's not always.
Well, I mean, and I think a great example of this exact thing happening in literature was James Joyce, right? And I've not read as much of James Joyce's prose. I have a rough understanding of that, but I've read quite a bit of his poetry. And he gets a lot of flack by modernists for his poetry because his poetry is all classicist, right? It's very strict meters. It's very strict rhyme patterns. It's traditional classicist poetry, right? It has those themes. It harkens back to Greece. It harkens back to Rome mythology. But at the same time, like Joyce's stuff is all about the intersection of the I'm going to get country on this, the highfalutin, right, and the dirt road, right? I mean, it's all about like the common man intersecting with the high class, and how those things are. I mean, those are, and I think for Joyce it was because those things are inextricable part of his life as an Anglo-Irishman, where he had this English education, but his heart was with many of his illiterate friends.
So one distinction that has to be made is the fact that just because someone makes commonality a topic or a theme for a work does not mean that therefore that somehow appeals to that demographic. In fact, it tends to be, I think, almost an inverse relationship. A lot of common people like the romances. Common people often don't look at literary fiction and go, man, I just want to read about regular people and their regular days, slumming through their regular lives and being really just like getting nowhere within life. Right. Escape. In fact, when you look at the reading habits of the British people, especially when it goes to the Victorian era, sensation fiction, which eventually gave birth to what we have today with, the pulps and comics.
Yeah.
It was all basically, it was fantastical. It's murders and it's drama. That's what the common people actually wanted to read. They didn't want to read a poem about how, oh, noble soul, you poor farmhand, you're actually the closest to enlightenment. They don't give a crap about that. So
Sherlock's an adventure character. Like Sherlock's not primarily about his deductions. Sherlock also goes on like these badass, kung fu fights.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's part of the what I was trying to really get at was the idea that I mean, even highbrow art, if highbrow art is appealing to a common place, it's in a place of elevation. And I think that even like adventure stories, and I was talking to a number of Marmaduke fan ahead of time before the show started. I think adventure stories, I think action stories, I think hero stories are metaphors that we tell each other to teach us something about ourselves, right? And that comes back to my highfalutin idea of the heroism of the mundane, right? We have boring everyday lives, but it takes the heroic effort to get up every morning. We don't necessarily think of it that way, but we do, right? We fight, we slog, we don't always know if we're going to get the bills paid. We don't always necessarily know if there's going to be food at the end of the table. I mean, we're Americans. We're pretty rich. That's not a problem that we have faced directly.
Poor Matt C. He's only got 10 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hate to interject, but we need to hear from Matt because he only got two minutes now.
I think we're talking about this. All this is Gene. Luen Yang, right? Like I've got my copies of the airline manual known as Boxers and Saints in front of me, and it has pride of place in my comic collection because I really like the story. I think overall, he ran out of time or he got tired of it by the time he got to the Saints part because it's like half as long as the Boxers part.
Yeah.
Without a narrative reason for that, I just have to assume.
I think there is a very big narrative reason for that.
Yeah.
It's a little odd. Like they don't even line up right because of that. Like you can tell they were supposed to line up perfectly so you could make the face. And when you put them together, it doesn't work right for the OCD. They're not lined up straight.
I see Matt's point though. There does seem to be something missing from the story. There's just something. There's something. That's one of my struggles I had with it. But no, when you called it, I'm curious. You said airplane manual, and I immediately thought of Chris Ware. Because
that can be a compliment, sure.
Okay, yeah. Because Chris Ware has I think he's written some pieces that are basically just architecture as comics, essentially, and he's very much in that mode. But for Chris Ware, it is a deliberate artistic decision to basically take comic art and do such I don't know. To make the airplane manual out of it. With Yang, it almost seems I wouldn't say incidental, but it doesn't seem quite as deliberate.
Yeah, I think it's an artistic limitation. He's doing the best he can with what he has.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. I mean, like if anybody's seen my art when I draw, there's just a limit to what it can do. I'm no Matt C. Heck, I'm no number one Marmaduke fan. Although I think I'm a little better than Twitless, just a little. But I think there's an element to that too. But I also think that for those two books specifically, American Born Chinese and Boxers and Saints, I think it actually suits the story because it's very personal. And even though neither of those are his story, they're still his story. And that's one of the things that I think went on there. So for those of you in the chat who may not have read Boxers and Saints, I'm going to spoil the ending of Saints just a little bit because I think Matt's wrong that it ends abruptly. I mean, it doesn't abruptly, but I think it ends abruptly on purpose.
No, I think
because the implication
was a little.
I think it's because there's less of an origin story that you have to tell for the audience that's going to read it, because most of the people that read Boxers and Saints grew up in a society that was already built on a Christian background. So there's a lot of history that doesn't need explained. But the Chinese operas are not something that most people are familiar with. So there's more explanation that goes into that. I think that's one aspect. The second aspect is the Four Girls story, Viviana's story, isn't over. It's just not for you to know what happens. And that's very blatant in it. Like,
did you like that? Did that feel a little?
I do.
Like
I do not. I do not like it. I do
like it because that's life. That is the essence. I
want to hear the I don't like it perspective, and then I want to give my defense of the why I like it perspective after I hear the criticism.
Let me say why I like it.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do it in a circle. I said I like it because I think it's real, and I believe that this world is not my home, and I think that's that's a super important aspect of that story. That's where hope is on that side of the coin. But anyway.
That's a really I can appreciate that. I think he just pulled his punches, pun intended, I guess. And he didn't think he could get this passed with first second with everyone dying at the end the way it probably was originally meant to. So he had to do this like epilogue situation that kind of waters down the moment he's building two books towards this the merger of the timelines, so
Twitless, why doesn't it work for you?
So it's not structurally, because structurally I think the story works pretty well. The thing I do not like actually is tied in with the spiritual side of it. I felt like there was something missing because not from the Boxers side. The Boxers side I think was pretty on point for me. But when it got to the saints, we had a character who was supposedly a Christian. And I mean, she kind of is, I think. But the story never lets her really understand what she believes in.
Until the last moment, maybe, or not even then.
I don't even. It's so vague and ambiguous. I don't even. It's really hard to say, and because she never really gets to understand it in a satisfying way for me, it really undermines a lot of what happens at the conclusion. Because you have to understand your faith in order to really sacrifice yourself for it, right? In order for that sacrifice to have a lot of meaning. If I'm just here because everyone else hates me and the cookies were good at the church. And most of what Viviana does throughout the entire story is basically just that. And there never really seems to be a moment where she really understands. Because she says, I'm becoming a white-faced devil. And at the very end, it's like she meets Jesus for a second and then does a nice thing. But there's never that moment of like, even like Thief on the Cross, right? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Even with that brief moment, the thief understands and pretty much spells out, I am a sinner. You are Lord. Please remember me. I basically am asking you into my heart. And Jesus, bam. And so that story, even though it's brief, has, I believe, full impact because the thief understands what he is doing. And I really feel like with Viviana, it was very hard for me to see that she understood anything that was truly at the root of Christianity. If anything, there was this weird bleed over with her faith and
the goddess of compassion in Chinese lore, like Yang's clearly making some kind of connection between Chinese mythology and Christianity.
And I can see that. It's just the fact that like for her sacrifice for Christianity to make sense, she needs to understand what she's doing, and I don't feel like the story did a very good job of establishing that she did.
All right.
So when she has that moment, it just didn't. It felt undermined for me. I didn't feel the full impact of it.
Okay, I think that's a fair criticism because in my mind, I sort of see Yang as a Catholic who's almost fighting with himself, right? Like I feel like in Yang's mind, his Chinese identity is fighting with his Catholic identity, and he's using his art to try to express, how he puts those two things together. And
I think actually that's not to super interrupt, but I think that's clear in Boxers and Saints, and I think it's also like blatantly
implied,
in American Born Chinese.
I think he's coming out and said it too, because he's talked about Boxers and Saints. I think he's said that he's working out the two identities.
Okay, so I want to kind of like take Twitless's criticism and put it in my own words. So if the problem is that 4Girl doesn't understand her faith fully, maybe my way of putting it is I feel like Saints being shorter, maybe we're missing some context on her, but I actually think the fact that she doesn't understand until the end is an important aspect of her character, because the parallel is between 4Girl Viviana and Bao for the Boxers, where neither of them quite understand what they're doing. They're both swept up into a religion they don't quite understand. And at the end, both of them, an aspect of that religion sort of like comes crashing down on them. So for Bao, he has a religious conviction in the Chinese opera that makes him a conqueror. But at the end, he gets shot, right? Like he finds out, oh, I'm actually not bulletproof, right? So for Viviana, I think that her lack of understanding is an important part of her character at first, because she doesn't know what the Christian faith is, except as something outside of the Chinese experience. And I want to get outside of the Chinese experience, right? So to me, like the appearance of Jesus Christ to her feels like a dramatic twist at the end to kind of like fix that and kind of like explain to her what the Christian faith is. But the reason I think it is that way is it's paralleling Bao's story, where Bao commits himself to the Chinese religion. Chinese nationalism turns out to be a false religion that betrays him in the end. Viviana doesn't even understand what Christianity is, but when she participates in it, right? But it's almost like, even though she didn't understand what it was sort of like that was used to bring her to Christ anyway. And I think that the key point that I think we need to interpret it is she thought she was going to be a Joan of Arc, meaning she thought she was going to be a warrior hero. Her final vision of Joan of Arc is Joan of Arc dying and crying out Jesus' name and pointing her towards Jesus. So the idea is that what she was thinking of in Christianity, Joan of Arc was the most important thing for her, was pointing her towards the real thing in Christianity at the end. And she dies not understanding what her death accomplished, but we learned that her death accomplished something, even though she didn't have that perspective. So that's the meaningful part of it to me. I would say I agree with the criticism that the Christianity side of things feels like it's done like much quicker, and it's almost like maybe Yang is a little nervous to have like an explicit explanation of Christianity in a young adult novel. But I do think there's a beautiful parallel between Viviana's story and Bao's story, where I would say at the end of the story, Christianity is triumphant, right?
But is it though? I that's the thing.
Absolutely,
it's a bit more. It's a bit more complex than that, I think.
Because I think it absolutely is, because the situation is that the things that because I think the person that introduces Viviana, who's means life, right? She didn't have a life and she gets a life. That's an important aspect of the story too. Her name becomes life, and then her fate is to die. So that's another aspect of that too. But the person who introduces her to Christianity is the doctor, right? The doctor is a flawed person, and she comes to understand his flaws, and she at first rejects him and then doesn't, right? Because at the very end, because it's a thing. And that's one of the things, is like Christianity is not straightforward. It's not, I mean, it's simple, but it's simple in theory, but the practice of it is a life's work, and we still don't get it right.
I'm not talking about Viviana per se, because I think her death, it still has some meaning. It's the fact that if we look at Bao, right, only in the most loose interpretation can you assume that he's a Christian by the end of that. That
right.
fake, that's not Christianity triumphant. If we're talking about Bao's story, Bao just his life is technically saved in terms of his physical life, but if we're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, he did a fake prayer to save himself, and if he does not come to Christ, his story does not end in any positive way.
Right, but the other side of it is that Boxers also demonstrates that everything Bao believed in was not true.
That doesn't immediately mean it's Christians.
Right. So I guess, is this a criticism of it artistically, or is this a criticism of it as a Christian parable?
Right. So that's why I said, like, and this, some of the things you were mentioning, Marmaduke, were, and I agree, I concur that structurally speaking, I think the story works pretty darn well. The problem I had with it was that I went into the story with a expectation of it having more spiritual fulfillment and substance. And I walked away from the story feeling a bit empty regarding the spiritual fulfillment I expected from the story.
Did you guys mention the? I read that he wrote it as a response. He was reflecting on 9/11, and then looking at the Boxer Rebellion as a nationalist, religious, terrorist movement within China to expel infidels, and he wanted to explore, and I think he was so he's interested in the Boxer story is what brought him in, and then he's seeing the infidels being Westerners and also Christians, and then he gets the saints element in there as well, but the
draw is the Boxer element.
Yeah, that's like when I hear him talk about the reason he wrote it, it's the Boxer element. He's trying to figure out, like, how can I understand someone who is going to become a terrorist from my own cultural background.
Lines up with the length of the books.
Yeah.
So a question on this, Twitless. What order did you read them in?
I read Boxers first and Saints second.
Okay.
I as well.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's a lie. The first time I read it, I read them both a chapter at a time together. The second time I read it Boxers and Saints. I actually like it better. I think it would be better if it was just rearranged into a single book, maybe.
Single book?
Yeah.
Matt had to go. Yeah, I read Saints first. I didn't realize it was part of a two-part. So like I just picked Saints up because I was looking at American-born Chinese on your suggestion, Marmaduke.
Okay.
I saw that there and I was like, well, this is interesting. I got it at the library and I picked up that and I was like, okay, this is really cool. And then I read Boxers knowing Saints already. So I think that maybe that shapes my impact on the story a little bit too.
Okay. I want to throw another argument at Twitless, right? Because I feel like your argument reflects something I felt. Like I felt like the Christian element is the de-emphasized part, right? So this will be interesting because Matt read Saints first. I think if you read Saints and then go back and read Boxers, your interpretation of Saints changes your interpretation of Boxers, right? So if you read Boxers in isolation, it's a story about Chinese nationalism. If you read Boxers after having read Saints, I would say you pick up on a Christian interpretation of the Boxer Rebellion. So the Chinese emperor becomes a satanic figure if you look at him through the Christian lens, right? So one of the reasons I say that I
didn't see that.
Go ahead.
I would say it even within the context of the story, because like, you know, the things that Bao wants to believe and the things that he was taught Kung Fu are things that the emperor comes in and says, no, you don't. You know, the only value is me. The only value is nation. The only value is success and victory.
See, he's not the hard part I struggled with, and this is what makes Boxers a good book, by the way. But the Emperor's not really wrong. Most of his predictions that he makes are true. When he calls certain things out, he says, you do this or you lose. You do this, you die. Mm-hmm. And when he says, when Bao basically relents in the burning of the library, he says, that's it. You're done now. You had your moment to basically save China from the West, and it's gone. He's right. And the very end of that, it wasn't like, oh, the demons were just leaving, although you could kind of see it that way. Mostly it was almost like the way I almost felt like the story was kind of like, not in a certain terms of like heroes and villains, but just like there are no heroes. This is just the way history works. And this is just the way this piece of Chinese culture is going. It's gone. And there's a mournfulness to it. And one thing I do have to point out, and Matt just left, and this is so sad. The color choices, I believe, reinforce this. I noticed that Boxers is in full color. Saints is brown.
Yeah.
It is monochromatic. The color is what's leaving at the end of China. They are losing their color. They're losing something. And, you know, the Christianity side of things is portrayed as much more, like I said, monochromatic. And like I said, that particular choice, I think, reinforces this ambiguous quality of these nations clashing with each other.
Mm-hmm. So let me throw in a completely different interpretation and see what you think of it. Do you think that Gene is maybe like a closet progressive, right? Do you think he sees in Catholicism or sees in Christianity something like is it the colonial religion that robs indigenous people of their culture and their color then? So is Christianity the bad guy in Boxers and Saints?
So that's the thing is I think I'll have to go back because I remember glancing over an interview where he kind of mentions this. I think it's not so simple. I think that's the fact he wrote 2 books. If he wanted to, if it were the theory that you suggest there, I think it would have been 1 book. He's writing 2 books because he has 2 identities. The fact of the matter is it's not so simple. The fact of the matter, it's not necessarily either or, it's both and. It's the fact that both of these cultures have come together. Christianity the West did in fact rob China during this time periods, especially of their culture. These things did happen. In that sense, there is villainy, but there's more to it than that because he's a Christian as well. And so he does believe in the spiritual truth that the West brought, even though it was complicated by the fact it was brought under the sword. And it was brought in a way that brought a lot of pain. And so very clearly he's working through his issues of these dual identities. And that's why he wrote 2 books.
So is the both and hurting the art or is the both and helping the art?
Give me a second. Reese, you jump in with your idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to say that Christianity was brought with like by the sword. It was brought with the sword. Those were connected events, but they weren't contingent events.
Okay.
So I mean, because there were missionaries that had been working, Hudson Taylor and all sorts of stuff. Folks been working in China for centuries before.
Right, but in the story, the way it's portrayed, the priest comes in. The first thing he does is he takes their culture, which is an idol, and he smashes it. So there's definitely it's even that character who we later on find out he's a pretty good guy in many ways, but he's presented as a complex figure. He's presented with both good and bad qualities. He's bringing the truth, he's bringing charity, he's bringing lots of good things, but he's also taken their Chinese culture and he's smashing it to pieces. Yeah. So that's, to me,
right.
Structurally speaking, I believe as a story, a lot of it works. The problem I find, again, is when I try to get spiritual meaning out of the story. Again, from a literary perspective, I think from an artistic perspective, a lot of this is working. It's just as a Christian, when I walk into it, I walk away kind of empty-handed.
Well, and I think
that's how I feel towards it.
I think something that goes back to the reading it in the order, right? So when you read Boxers first, Saints first, you find out that the people that are attacking the city are just people, right? They're just people that are attacking the city. And then you read Boxers and you see that these people they're in a frenzy. They believe that they're the gods of the opera, right? But they're not. They're just people. And so everything that they believe is not true. And even the things they claim to believe, in the value of the culture and everything else, that they willingly destroy for a victory that they can't attain. Right. And I think that's part of the tragedy of the story, is that, the dream that they had is an impossibility. The dream itself is a lie. That comes back to the messiness that you're talking about. The history is just messy. That, there are heroes, there are villains. Sometimes they're both the same person in the same time. But I think that's part of it. It's not that it's because history is messy, because reality is messy. And I also think that it very intentionally doesn't give an end to Bao's story, like in any kind of final way. I think that's an intentional movement.
So I guess what we keep getting back to is, from the Christian perspective, does it have anything to say that's helpful to the Christian? And this is maybe even something where, like, I could look at it through Yang's Catholic lens too, and say, well, maybe it's not enough to talk about it just from a Christian perspective. Maybe we have to talk about it. We have to put on a Catholic hat so we can talk about it the way Yang might be thinking about it. So
but I didn't think to invite a Catholic.
Right.
What's wrong with me?
Oh no!
We need Doug.
Yeah, could have brought Doug. I don't know if Doug Ernst has read it. I don't.
Or Tim Lim.
Yeah.
I mean, like it just stands out to me that one of the things that happens is that Vibiana admires a saint, and then the saint points her to Christ. So it's almost a literal illustration of the Catholic idea of veneration of the saints pointing to veneration of Christ, right? So maybe part of it is Twitless. I'm assuming you're coming from some kind of Protestant perspective, maybe.
I was actually raised Catholic for the first few years of my life. I've actually been, as a Protestant, I went on a Catholic pilgrimage to Our Lady Guadalupe. So I had some interesting interactions and smatterings.
Okay, so maybe like a maybe, or like not settled. Anyway, sorry.
I'm definitely coming from a more of a Protestant background. I'm just saying I'm not alien to Catholicism.
Gotcha. All right. So maybe that's part of it. So for me, I try to look when I'm looking at the gospel and narrative. What I am interested in is like a degree of sincerity on the artist's part. And I'm looking for artistic intelligence in the presentation of it, right? Like the obvious example is something like God's Not Dead, or where it's just like it's not even meant to be art. It shouldn't be interpreted as art. It's meant to be a sermon in the form of a movie, right? So when I see something,
sorry, that distinction is something I hadn't heard anybody say out loud, but it's amazing.
Okay. Well, anyway, so when I see, go ahead, Twit.
Well, I don't want to be too mean to some of those people, because sometimes there's a little bit of a bleed over, like Facing the Giants.
Yeah,
Facing the Giants has been called, I think, or seen by many as sermon, and in film form, it also functions as a movie.
Correct. Yeah.
So some of them are trying harder.
Well,
than
no,
others.
yeah, absolutely. I think that there's definitely. I think that there's a genre within Christian entertainment that it's a sermon as X property.
It's basically a parable at that point.
And then there's. Well, I think if you're actually parable, that's art. Because a parable is a separation of an abstraction of a thing from the thing it represents, right?
But and that's not. It's also not necessarily a insult for me to call something a sermon. I'm saying you have to evaluate something based on what it wants to be. So if a Christian artist says to me, "I really want to make art as a Christian, I want the art to be serious," then I have to evaluate it as art. If they say, "I don't care about the art, I want to make." I want to make something that will convert people to Jesus Christ. Then it's almost like, okay, well, let's talk about the doctrine then, right?
Okay, yeah, you're talking about the difference between the Christian creation of art or the creation of Christian art.
Right. So when I see something like what Yang is doing, it's sort of like, well, I have to admire the construction element of it. And it's almost like I'm laying aside the Protestant quibble for that moment because I'm sort of respecting that a Catholic can do this as well. So maybe there's an element of it where for Yang, maybe even his Catholicism is creating some of the problem. I heard my name says the Bunder drum. So for Yang, the saint is the pointing to Christ, which means that Christ has a diminished role in the overall book. At the same time, I feel like it gives Christ a special.
Did you cut out there?
Learned who Christ, deep and informed faith. Who are we missing anybody? Anyway, sorry. So it would be like she would have a more informed faith, right? She might understand Christianity better. But as it's presented narratively, what happens is she finds out who Christ is at the end. So it gives it as a narrative from a narrative construction point of view, it gives it more of a woomph because it's sort of like she was mulling around Christianity. She tripped and found Jesus, which is something that's struck me is. Oh, we lost Twitless, dang it. Like C.S. Lewis has told the story of like riding a motorcycle. He rode the motorcycle not believing that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. He finishes the motorcycle ride and he believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The surprise by joy experience. So my interpretation of Viviana's Christ experience is that she's surprised by joy. She didn't even know that's what she was getting when she signed up to Christianity. And finally at the end, she finds out that Christ is at the center of Christianity. So I guess we lost Twitless so I can hear his critique. He's back. All right. So that might have cut out. But my basic point was by having Christ only appear at the end, it creates a special emphasis on Christ's importance to Viviana's story that it might not have had if it were more fully developed throughout the narrative.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, actually. I think it avoids being so on the nose that a lot of Christian art does, but it also explains the transcendence of the Christian message, not in a fullness, not in a way that's like a doctrinal thesis, but it just permeates the thing. And that's the thing is like you look at like a lot of Christian art, what it doesn't get right. They all have happy endings. Everybody, becomes their moral best self. Christ changes everybody in every way, which is he does. The Spirit does do this in our lives, but it doesn't look like the last 10 minutes of It's a Wonderful Life. It takes years and death to make it work. And that's something that to have Viviana understand progressively a little more and a little more and a little more about how how life changes. I think that's an important aspect of it, especially in comparison to the whole nature of culture.
So Twitless, we've been kind of like going back and forth on you on whether we think it works as a Christian narrative. So one question I always ask is, how do you fix it? Like I always like imagining how do I fix it? Because maybe that points out not necessarily what the flaw is, but what could be done to address the flaw you see.
So it's not just about understanding.
Oh, do we still not have Twitless? Dang it!
Hold on, I'm here. Am I not in?
I hear you.
Okay. Cool. Okay. All right.
Let me just check my headphones here.
Hello, testing. Yeah. My mic's coming in. Okay.
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
So the issue that I'm seeing is not just about understanding, right? Because I think you could have someone who.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
All right. I can't hear Twitless. Can you hear Twitless?
I can hear Twitless just fine.
Shoot. I can't hear Twitless.
I think your headphones just died on you.
Well, I unplugged it and plugged it back in, and you're fine. It's just Twitless I can hear.
Do you have me?
All right, I'm going to try leaving and coming back and see if that helps.
We'll try that out. Let's see if that works. It's a great show.
It's the best.
Everything's gone exactly according to plan.
No, I've missed this show so much. I'm glad you brought it back. I'm glad I got to be a part of it. Thank you.
I needed some time, but I'm glad to be here.
Honestly, like it might be a good idea to plan those breaks. You know, like take the summer off every year.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I'm not.
Anyhow, so are you wanting to wait to try to see if Marm comes back for your point?
Yes.
Okay, we'll just wait.
Because he was the one who asked me the question. It would be kind of weird for me to do it otherwise. I guess we could just burn some dead air here. The chat says they're saying a lot of hello.
There are a lot of hello. There's a lot of people.
We've got let's do some shout outs. We got Skinny in the chat. We've got
LP coming to us from the land of the frozen north.
Yeah, we got Bunderdome. Good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well.
I actually had somebody get a hold of me this week and bawl me out for not having done anything all summer. He's just like, who was I supposed to listen to?
Aww. I mean, I agree with him because darn you, I didn't have any. I've been missing these, but no, you gotta take care of yourself.
A lot of hell in here for discussion about parables. Well, I kind of have a foul mouth. That's
See, we're not saying hell good. We're saying hell no. See, that's okay. That's okay. The Bible says hell in it. They mention it quite a bit, actually.
A lot.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open up Twitter and another tab just in case Marm tries to get a hold of me.
No hell yes. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Skinny. That's correct. If we say hell yeah, then we're in trouble.
Oh yes. We've been talking about Stan Lee all summer long. That's true. That's happening in 2 weeks, actually. Speaking of Catholics, Doug Ernst is going to be coming on with Captain and I to talk about Stan Lee in 2 weeks. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah. And Twitless will probably be there too.
Yep.
And next week, Marcel Dupree is going to talk about a lot of comics that he makes because he's made a boatload. And we're going to try to talk about all of them because I'm a glutton for punishment.
Hey, what'd I miss?
Nothing. Twitless was waiting for you.
All right.
Yeah. I thought it'd be weird if I answered your question to Matt. So we were talking about, you asked how would I go about fixing it or addressing the lack that I was seeing in the spiritual side of things. So to me, I think it's more about not just the lack of understanding, it's misunderstanding, if I really kind of zero in on it. Because you can have someone who is new to the faith, who has a childlike understanding of faith, right? So if we have a child who goes, I'm accepting Jesus into my heart, but they have like just a very simple understanding of what they've done, that doesn't really bother me because they're still understanding what they can. The issue that Viviana, I think that makes me feel empty is the fact that it's not just a lack of understanding. It's the fact that throughout the story and even up until pretty much the last moments, she has a misunderstanding of what she's doing and what she believes in and what her spiritual identity is, or what even a spiritual identity should be. It's basically, like I said, she starts it off and it's everyone hates me, so I'm going to go embrace something, the other, essentially. I've been othered anyway, so I'm going to embrace the other. Yeah. And it's like, that's not how you spiritually become a Christian from any understanding I have of it. It's actually a deep misunderstanding. Then it's like, oh, I'm here because of like the food's good. You don't get into heaven because, you think the food is good at the church. That doesn't get you into heaven, again, by any understanding. Even, I know that Catholicism has a, slightly different understanding of how salvation works, but even under their, I've talked with priests before, there's quite a lot of overlap between Protestantism and Catholicism, and the fact we both understand you know, your salvation still technically comes from Jesus Christ's sacrifice, and you still have to invite him into your heart. Like that,
Right.
That's still part of it. And so it's not just a lack of understanding or a childish understanding. It's the fact that she completely misunderstands all of it. And then at the very end, she's given this sort of like
Personal revelation.
But it's a universalist personal revelation. It's like, here's Jesus, but he's being portrayed with a bunch of, you know, Chinese mythology symbolism as well. And it's like, again, do you have any understanding of what you're doing or asking for? Because I believe the last quote is, doesn't Jesus ask her to understand as I understand you, or something like that?
Be mindful of others as I am mindful of you. And what her connection is, no one has been mindful of me. Christ is mindful of me. Yeah.
But that's not accepting Jesus into your heart. That's not repentance. So again, there's some pieces I believe missing that are misunderstood here. And that's what I feel like is, just to wrap up.
Go
so
ahead.
if I were to address this, I would basically not change much at all. But if I were to change anything, it would be near the end, and I would have her basically do a thief on the cross.
All right.
It doesn't have to be much. It can simply be, I want Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It can simply be her asking for that, or something of that nature, even if you want to be kind of vague about it. But that's what I would be looking for.
Okay, because she even seems to die. I mentioned this. She even seems to die hopeless, right?
I died and couldn't save anyone.
Yeah, I died and couldn't save anyone. Right. So what's really important about this is you're kind of getting at the heart of, like, Matt and I are looking at this and resonating with the Christian aspect of it, and you're identifying, I think, real aspects of the story that, it could either be like one of the greatest Christian stories ever told, or it could be like a misunderstanding of the Christian story. So the universalist aspect this is one of the problems of, I think, Yang being vague, is it could either be like a syncretistic statement that, the Chinese gods have truth in them as well. That's just like the Christian gods. Or it could be a statement by Yang that which I love within Chinese myth is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. If it's that, then it's like, I agree totally, right? We're just like, that which is beautiful in any pagan mythology it's beautiful because it parallels or foreshadows something about the true person of Jesus Christ, right? But because of the vagueness of how it's stated, you could have like this sort of universalistic interpretation, and I'm guessing maybe you could have this fatalistic interpretation where her death doesn't accomplish nothing. What I'm resonating with is the idea that she believes her death accomplishes nothing. At the end, she's trusting in Jesus. I guess that's the whole point. Is what you're looking for is a thief on the cross moment. I kind of see that in. I would say the closest thing I see to that is her refusal to use her Chinese name and her insistence on keeping her Christian name at the end. That is post her revelation of Christ, her way of saying, I am with Christ after having experienced his presence, right?
I think you actually have a thief on the cross moment, because she's directly given the instruction, deny Christ, turn away from this pagan religion, embrace the true Chinese religion, embrace your culture. And she says, no.
Oh, Matt C says Yang was trying to do what Marm is saying. In my opinion, it's very Inklings-esque, debatable if Yang succeeds. Okay.
I concur with that statement. Yes.
Well, and I think, once again, I perceived it exactly that way, but I also read it first, right? So in reading Saints first and knowing where you're leading through in Boxers, it's very clear to me that, like, Boxers is a bait and switch, right? All the things that Bao believes he's moving toward, and I got to wrap after this. I'm sorry, guys. But all the things that Bao is moving toward in his life, it betrays his values. It betrays the people around. It betrays the things that he believes to be true. It betrays his honor. It betrays the culture. It betrays the stories. It betrays the library. It betrays the love of his life. And so he has to destroy everything he thinks is important for the sake of nation building, for the sake of the nation, right? And that becomes the only thing of value is the nation. And and what is that? Whereas Viviana begins life being rejected and becomes progressively more accepted and accepting of the fact that life, the ultimate essence of life isn't this life. It's what's coming after that. And I think that, and I think you also, one of the things that gets soft soaped a little bit that I think, those who, that at least I read into it, is when she went through confirmation, she was asking all of these questions, and there's all these things that, you don't want to sit there and read through confirmation, right? I mean, that's not the whole thing. That's a bad comic, but they had enough scenes of it where she's asking the hard questions and she's pushing forward and she's moving all these things on that. And I think that to say that she just has a total misunderstanding isn't accepting the necessary implications of the stories, of the premises of the story being told.
Okay. What I've appreciated about Twitless's criticisms is he's identified criticisms I had, but then I kind of like used my framework to explain the criticism, right? And why I don't think the criticism ultimately defeats my experience of the story. Maybe like another line I'm thinking of is at some point Viviana says to Christ, "I've heard your stories over and over again," right? So it's not like she doesn't have intellectual knowledge of the content of the faith. She does have intellectual knowledge of it. So the real question is, does she have a conversion experience at any point, right? And I'm seeing elements in the appearance of Christ that look to me like a conversion. One thing I'm taking into consideration is that Viviana's character is supposed to be a child, right? So if she was an intellect, I would expect like this like real deep grappling with these questions.
I'm pretty sure she's 15 by the end of it.
15, all right.
Yeah, they're talking about marriage.
Yeah, but
no, but they're not talking about 12-year-old marriage. I believe she's 15 at the end.
Yeah,
I think you're probably right about that. But a 15-year-old still, I mean, you're still
teenagers are pretty stupid.
Teenagers are really stupid.
No, but there's a big difference between 15 and like 7.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In terms of like understanding of things, I think we can all agree that the story, even Matt as well. I think we're all in concurrence that the story is very well crafted and structured in terms of a narrative. I think our mileage is varying in our takeaways from it from a spiritual perspective.
I have one more question. Did you only read it once?
I have only read it once so far, yes.
All right, so let me tell you something. When I first read it, and I said, I don't really like that. I read it. I was much more moved the second time. I feel like it's one of these books where knowing what you know from reading it at the end of the book completely changes your experience or framework reading it from the beginning, right? So it's almost like I much more had your perspective at the end of the first time. Like I don't feel like it was interesting seeing Jesus show up. I don't know if it said too much meaningful about Christ. And then I come to it the second time and I start. I guess what changed is because I read Boxers with saints in mind. Then it's sort of like, okay, now I start seeing the Christian thread maybe move more powerfully through this. So it's not that the Christian thread is contained to saints. It's that the Christian thread comes alive in Boxers after you've read Saints. So maybe I don't know, maybe that's an aspect that's kind of like affecting our interpretations.
It's possible.
Okay.
So
I'm stubborn though, so
that's true. Okay, I seriously have got to wrap up. I've got to go do a thing in 10 minutes. So
all right, take it easy,
everybody. I thank you so much for tuning in to the Reborn Mattriarchy. Next week will be me and Twitless and Marcel Dupree. That's almost a movie title. And which I didn't even see. But then 2 weeks we are going to be going. It's joined by Captain Cummings and Doug Ernst, and we're going to be talking about. Here we go. Matt has a great comment here. But talking about Stan Lee. So that's the thing is, and then week after, I don't even know what's going on for sure, but we'll let you know on the interwebs as it happens. Thank you for tuning in. And also, final question, Twitless, have you read American Born Chinese?
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to do this again because I also like that one a lot. So This is about as much as 1 second has ever given us. So first second has ever given us.
Thank you, Matt C. I agree with Matt C. Okay, that part I do agree with. Like if you're gonna talk about Jesus Christ, do not be afraid to talk about Jesus Christ. That's all I have to say to artists. Yeah.
I will.
Can we do quick shout outs and plugs for things for just a second?
Really quick.
Okay, so great. All right, so check out Adventures of Omega Girl on Indie Planet. Issue 1 is out. I'm currently lettering issue 2, should come out this fall. Also check out superschool.com, my weekly superhero webcomic. Got lots of content for you. Reese, you got chunk stuff to plug?
Yeah. That's my Patreon. It goes to making comics. That's all I got for time for today.
Subscribe to Marmaduke on YouTube. That'll be fine.
Subscribe to number one Marmaduke fan, and we'll catch everybody next week because I gotta go.
Bye.
Bye.
Right, see ya. Thanks for coming.
Man, this hour is hard. Bye.
Bye.